I'm on video. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Lani Habrock here with CAIR Oklahoma, Government Affairs Director. We are here today with a super exciting guest. We have Cyndi Munson, Representative Cyndi A Munson from House District 85. Many of you know her. She comes to a lot of our events and speaks and is always a super strong supporter of the Muslim community, minority communities, the elderly, anybody that needs her. Cyndi's there for you. So quick introduction. So Cyndi Munson is actually the first Asian American woman elected to the Oklahoma legislature, which is amazing. She has concentrated her legislative efforts on providing equal pay for equal work, strengthening the rights of survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and assisting Oklahoman veterans and working to make life easier for our loved ones who suffer from Alzheimer's and dementia. So she's done a lot of amazing work. She leads with compassion and strength, and I'm just so excited to have her on our show today. So welcome, Cyndi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here with you all.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. Well, we'll jump into our questions. So I met you in 2014. We were both running for state house, different districts. We both actually lost that election, but then you had a special election and you were elected to your current seat that you've held on since, was it 2015 or was it still
2015? Yep.
Yeah. Well, but before you were elected, I know you were working for the Girl Scouts of Western Oklahoma. And I know that that's really important work to you. And so how did this work inform, your decision to run for office in 2014? And then once you got elected, how did it inform the policy that you've been fighting for?
Yeah. So I've always been interested in public service work and wanted to be or considered running for office at one point when I was in high school and college. But, as you know, the practical nature of that is that it's there are a lot more barriers and obstacles for us than we think, especially those of us who didn't grow up with family members who held political office or were engaged in this way. But I started learning about the nonprofit sector when I was in graduate school and how I might be able to make a career in the nonprofit world, and have always been passionate about young women and making sure women know about their leadership potential and the difference that they can make for themselves and in their community. And so when I was a senior in college, I got really involved with the Girl Scouts. I was not a Girl Scout growing up, unfortunately. So I have never sold a box of cookies. I never got to go to Girl Scout camp, but I got connected with the organization because I had learned about programs that they were doing in lower income schools and neighborhoods and in juvenile detention centers. And that really caught my attention because I felt like girls in those communities really deserved Girl Scouts and really deserved a opportunity to the programs that girls who have moms and grandmas and aunts who are able to be their Girl Scout troop leader, whether that's because they have the time or they were Girl Scouts themselves, but not all of us have access to those relationships. And so I was a volunteer for a long time. And then when I was in graduate school, I joined the Girl Scout organization in Nebraska and was a staff member, and then came back to Oklahoma because I felt like if I'm going to work for an organization that impacts the lives of girls and women the way that the Girl Scout organization does, then I want to do that in my home state, especially with the statistics around education, criminal justice, healthcare, employment. I wanted to be back in a place where I felt like I could really make a difference. And so I was with the organization for about 5 years. And most of my work, I did work with traditional troops for a little bit, but most of my work was with our community programs and being in neighborhoods and schools. And I worked at the Oklahoma County Juvenile Center and also the Central Oklahoma Juvenile Center in Tecumseh. I went there once a week and did programming. And so all that to say, when you are that close to young women and their families and their community, and you hear about the failure of leadership, whether that's at the local level, the municipal level or at the state level, and where we're failing children and their families when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, affordable housing, criminal justice reform. That was really where I started to learn the impact of generational incarceration, what it's doing to our families and what it's doing to our children and what it's doing to our state. And so I was recruited to run. We were both recruited to run by Sally's List, who I still am very involved with today. But the calling was always kind of in my core and in my heart to speak up. And so I realized I was actually at a detention center doing programming one evening after I was asked, and my original answer was no, mainly because of all the things I could have listed that would keep me from doing this job. But when I was talking to the girls and I was hearing their stories, I really felt like, I can write grants and I can continue doing programming, which is important. But until there's systemic change, we'll just keep living this cycle. And so, being in the legislature now for 5 years, I like to think that just taking up space and using my voice is making a difference, because being a Democrat makes it a little bit more challenging to get policy through because of just the nature of how we're doing things. But we have made strides in criminal justice reform, and there's still so much work to do. We're not done yet. But I am grateful that I get to bring those experiences to the Capitol. And I do. And when Girl Scouts come and visit me, in fact, I just recorded a video for them earlier this morning because I can't be with them in person. I filmed a video and talked about the importance of their leadership and what 2020 means for women and the right to vote. But I try to remember, the girls that I worked with and their families and the stories that I heard, and that's why I'm here every day. And of course, for my constituents and the people I represent in House District 85, but I try to remember those who don't have access to us, and to continue fighting for them. So,
yeah, absolutely. We'll say I was a Girl Scout for a little bit. I think I was like a daisy for a couple years or something. But recently, I've joined with someone from actually Kinder Horn's office. We together have started a Muslim Girl Scout troop at Mercy School, and it's the first Muslim Girl Scout troop that Oklahoma's cities had. Tulsa already had one. And until I started getting in that and volunteering, I didn't realize how important and how impactful the Girl Scouts is for communities and kids, and all the statistics about, like every female astronaut that's, been at NASA, like was a Girl Scout, like every one of our female secretaries of state were in Girl Scouts. It's just it's just amazing what those connections and the education and the empowering element does for individuals and communities through Girl Scouts. So we'll go on to our next question. You talked about barriers for running for office. It's a little bit of a two-part question. So can you tell us what extra barriers you felt in running for office, especially the first time, in being a woman? And then I want to pivot to what barriers have you experienced during this pandemic, and how have you continued to connect with voters?
Oh, yeah, great question. In the beginning, running for office, my largest barrier and the thing that kind of scared me the most was raising money, because I knew I had volunteered on campaigns and, had watched different campaigns. So I kind of knew, what it takes financially and your time and commitment to running for office. But when you are a Democrat in Oklahoma, it presents some different challenges just because of the voter registration and just sort of the climate here in Oklahoma, in terms of making sure you can get in contact with people and have face-to-face conversation and have dialogue around the issues that I believe we share common concern about. But that was going to take a lot of money. And so that was my biggest barrier. When I was asked to make a list of 100 people in my network who could donate to me, that was really challenging because I at the time, getting names out of, and I have such supportive family and friends and people who have been helping me since day one. But I also knew about their lives. They just had children, or they lost a job, or they had some other financial challenges. Even for me, when I give to candidates, I can't always give a huge chunk of money, but I try to give what I can. And so that was really intimidating and difficult. The other barrier was just the nature of who I am and who I was at the time. I first ran when I was 28. And so, but what's interesting is me being a woman came up more than my age, which I thought was interesting. And so having to prove myself, not so much when I was going around knocking doors, but talking to donors and different people that I was trying to get to invest and learn about my campaign. And then just the nature of my work, I worked in nonprofit. And so, I had to be mindful of my schedule. Though my supervisor and my colleagues at the Girl Scout organization were as supportive as they could be without breaking any rules or anything, I still carried this guilt that, I was away from the office at a certain time, or I was, spreading myself so thin that, was I able to be there for my teammates and my staff? And it's not the type of job you can just leave and continue making an income and running for office. And so my life was consumed with work and campaigning. It still feels that way, but definitely during that time. So, but I've overcome that. I think because of the work I've put in, people are choosing to invest in me. I've gotten braver and more courageous to ask for money and to explain why they should invest in me. I wish it didn't take so much money to run for office, but this is the world we live in right now. And so trying to operate in that space still, I try to focus on the work and the things that I've done, and that's why people should invest. Yeah. And then now, just transitioning now where we are, being in elected office, and then during this time where we really can't connect face to face, it's not only one of my strengths and what I do, but it's something I really love. I love talking to people and randomly showing up at their house and asking them what they care about. And I've built great relationships with many of my constituents. And so it has been difficult, especially during a time when we are all going through so much with unemployment, with the pandemic, with the reckoning and awakening of our culture and how we treat each other, especially when it comes to race and identity. And so I think this is a time we need to be connecting. And I openly share this. I actually talked to my therapist last night and said, I am grieving not being able to do what I'm used to doing. But we have found other ways to connect over the phone, email, of course, and doing different things like this. It still doesn't match or compare to face-to-face conversation. But I'm on the phone daily talking to constituents who are struggling with the unemployment process right now, and just kind of doing some old school stuff like mail, writing notes and things like that. So yeah, it's been a challenging and interesting time, but I'm also trying to figure out what we are learning in this time. And I had this conversation earlier with my legislative assistant. I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. Do we end up depending more on technology, or do we realize how important human connection is and how important it is to be with each other, because we miss it so much now? And I have been out about like dropping literature and things like that, and people want to talk when they see you outside. And I see that's been an interesting change, because normally people are hiding from you. And so I wonder if that's because it's just, they want to connect. They want to talk to people, and definitely talk to their elected officials.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you mentioned, kind of old school using the mail system, which brings me to my next question. There's been a lot of controversy over voting during the pandemic and trying to push for more mail-in voting and looking at the barriers that our state currently has whenever one is trying to participate in absentee voting. And so I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on the mail-in voting? And yeah, and what do you see a problem with it, or how can we make it better?
Yeah. I'll tell you, when I first got elected, I filed legislation that would completely change our voting system in Oklahoma, where we would do all mail-in voting. And I had to take a few steps back, and I started doing research in states like Oregon and Washington and Colorado that this is how they vote every election, and have been, at least for the state of Oregon, for 25 years. But they went, it was a slow process. And one thing that I will say about everything happening and voting by mail and or absentee voting is that I'm grateful that there's more awareness. There are so many Oklahomans who don't even realize that we have a no excuse absentee ballot voting system. You don't have to be unable to get to the poll. You don't have to be out of town to vote by mail. You can simply do it because you want to. And so I've made a habit and practice of voting by mail in every election. I've been doing that for the last few years. I have gone to the poll a couple times since then. And definitely when I first ran for office, my first couple elections, I went to the ballot box and voted for myself. But I decided, this is something I talk about. I run legislation on this all the time. And so I want to make a regular practice and highlight how easy it is, even though there are barriers, and how much it benefits the voter to really take time to go over their ballot and to learn about the issues, especially when there are state questions listed on the ballot and things like that. However, the barriers around getting a notary public, and then the changes that we made in this last legislative session around making a photo copy of your ID, stapling that to your ballot. I'm grateful for the businesses and the individuals and the organizations that have taken the time to advertise, free photocopying or providing that notary public service. But you still have to, and I brought this up when we were on the floor, I talked about, you still have to have access to those things. So you still have to have a car or someone who can help you. And the truth is that we need to invest in our state election board, funding wise. And that will better support our county election boards. And so they're under-resourced when it comes to money and when it comes to staff. If we want to have absentee ballot voting where we just sign our signature, that still takes a special machine. So we'd have to update all our machines and all of that. And so we as legislators, I think people on both sides of the aisle, we all want secure and safe elections. And that's a shared goal. That's not something that one party wants over the other. So I think that we should have some more serious conversations around how we're funding our election boards, and also just better understanding the challenges that people are faced with when they go to their polling site to vote. And we need to invest money in just general voter education. We are relying too much on candidates and too much on the political parties to educate voters. I have always been pretty active about educating my district about absentee ballot voting, but that can't just land on me. That needs to be something that's a nonpartisan, just general civic engagement understanding. So I'm grateful, like I said, for the awareness. When we look and see what happened in the primary election with the absentee ballots that didn't get counted because they didn't get mailed in on time, I've shared tons of resources on my social media platforms. And I have friends who I know are engaged and educated on these issues, and it still can be very confusing. So we just need to keep talking about it. And, hopefully at some point when this pandemic is over, we'll keep having these conversations and not do what we can to make access easier for those who, don't have the resources to access a notary public or drive somewhere to get their IDs copied and all of that, and make this process less confusing and less challenging for everybody.
Yeah, so that's definitely an issue that I hope to see continued discussion on. Um, Talking about next session, 2021, what are kind of your thoughts on some issues that you think will be important next year?
Yeah, I think, I think elections will still be talked about. I think that will be something we still discuss, like you said, moving forward, continuing to smooth out these issues and create better access. Medicaid expansion with the passage of the state question, we are going to have to work together to ensure that the Medicaid program is funded. And so I predict that we'll have a lot of conversations about that. And, with everything going on, our budget situation will likely be more challenging or we might be back in those places that we were just a couple years ago, having to find revenue in a time where so many people and industries and companies and organizations are hurting. But we are going to have to make those difficult decisions, and we're going to have those difficult conversations, because a crisis has come up every year I have been elected. There has never really been a smooth year, even the year that we were able to pass a budget with less cuts than we had the year before. For so long, our agencies have been cut, our programs and services have been cut. And so, we did not solve all of the issues last year, as in 2019, when we were able to when revenue came in and we weren't facing a budget shortfall and revenue failure. There were still a lot of things we needed to fix. And so I predict that those will be the top issues that we consider and talk about. And it will be interesting to see where those conversations go, especially after this election cycle, and how people will respond to the challenges that they're seeing and facing now. There are so many people across the state who have never worked with a government agency, and out of no fault of their own, they now have lost their jobs, and they're working with the unemployment office, and they're contacting us at the Capitol. Many who have said, I didn't even know who my state representative was, and I had to look you up so I could tell you about my unemployment issue. Or I've never asked for anything. I've always appreciated what you do, but I've never asked for anything, and I need help. And and learning where our hands are tied and how far we can go, and the immediate difference we can make for them. And so I think there is this better awareness and better understanding of the challenges that we talk about regularly at the Capitol, and why investment in government is so important, especially when a crisis comes up. We shouldn't wait until the crisis gets to us. We should try to plan and prepare as much as possible. So I think funding and budget and healthcare, and then education. Go ahead and talk about that too. I know we were kind of having an offline conversation about it, but what does education look like going forward in terms of, how long does this pandemic last, and how dangerous, or how many, safety measures are we going to have to take for how long for our students to get back into the classroom, while holding space and understanding that parents have to get back to work. Right. And so I think we'll be having more conversations about that as well. And again, the more awareness around our election processes, and better awareness around voting rights, and how important it is to engage in this process, I think will come up too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So final question.
Okay.
So what are the must-see, must-do, must-eat at places in your district?
Oh, wow. Okay. So the best place in House District 85, at least for me, where I go to find calm and remind myself why I do this work and why I just need to keep going in life in general, is Lake Hefner. It's so beautiful, the sunrises and the sunsets. And, before I ran for office, I have run around that lake so many times and have so many pictures, and recently have been getting back into my practice of running and jogging, and, reconnecting with myself. I allow work and all that to kind of get in the way a little too much. So I would definitely say, make your way to Lake Hefner and enjoy the trails and the water, and people who are biking and jogging, and there are great restaurants over there too. But must eat. I'm trying to think of the places that I have been, ordering from, and I feel like they're all in like 88 or 87, House District 88 and House District 87. But I'll tell you what I've been eating the most in this pandemic. How's that?
Yeah.
Cheese Mahal has been the place, has been the place that I have been going to. It's like right outside of my district. I think it's in Representative Walkie's district, but they have made frequent stops to my house to deliver. Their food is so good and so comforting. And I have actually had a lot of constituent meetings there and lunches. And so it is a place of comfort, especially right now while I can't be out and about and talking to folks. So yeah, Lake Hefner, definitely do that. And my neighborhood, I live in Douglas Edgemere, and any restaurants on Western Avenue too are really good. BB's is one of my favorites. But the park, Douglas Park, off of it's like between Walker and Lee, so beautiful. So
yes,
get outside. That's my recommendation, is to get outside.
Take care of your mental health. Go outside, then eat some spicy, carby food, and you will. Yeah. So well, thank you so much for being with us today, Representative Munson. We look forward to the election in November. I do have to state here, CAIR Oklahoma is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we do not endorse or oppose any candidates. Somebody being on our show does not mean that we endorse them, but we love Cyndi Munson as a human being and appreciate her showing up to our show. It was kind of a last minute reach out, and she came through. So super appreciate it. If you want more information on Cyndi or her campaign, go to CyndiMunson.com, CYNDI, Munson, MUNSON.com, and you can read about her platform issues, more about her bio, and reach out to her via email there as well. So thanks again for joining us. I'm Lani Habrock with CAIR Oklahoma, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.